In the 24th century, Starfleet undertakes an unprecedented exploration of the final frontier, reaching into the darkness with an outstretched hand of friendship, one which is clasped warmly in return by many species, sharing knowledge and wisdom, illuminating the darkness. Emboldened by these successes, Starfleet reaches further into the darkness, confident that they may face the unknown. Further they reach, with an outstretched hand, perhaps too far. From within the darkness, beyond the unknown, a hand reaches back and clasps Starfleet in a cold, cadaverous grip. Starfleet recoils her hand in shock, unprepared for the horror of the unknown. Little does she realize, it is not over. Footsteps emanate from the shadows, and the darkness draws in closer. Is it mere curiosity, she wonders, as the steps ring closer? Or is it malevolent? Closer. These questions may never be answered. The only answer Starfleet receives is 11,000 cold corpses floating in the darkness, an eternal warning of the horror of the unknown. No one would have believed in the early years of the 24th century that their worlds were being watched by an intelligence far beyond their conception, cool and unsympathetic, that as the various powers busied themselves about their concerns, they observed, like scientists looking upon bacteria under a microscope. In the closing days of 2364, Federation and Romulan outposts along the neutral zone began to disappear, without warning or explanation. The only sign of their disappearance is their silence. Ships arrive to investigate, only to find nothing. No bodies, no wreckage or rubble, nothing but a great chasm where once outposts stood, as if some great hand had uprooted them from the surface as one might uproot a weed. In a subsequent confrontation, both the Romulans and Federation arrive at a revelation. Neither were responsible, nor did either one of them have any notion of who or what was truly responsible. As a result, an unprecedented agreement was made between these two powers to cooperate in the investigation of this unknown threat. Yet, for the time being, it would remain elusive, moving unseen through the darkness. It would be nearly a year before they could finally put a name to this fear. On the 28th of January, 2365, the USS Enterprise was by alien intervention transported to the Delta Quadrant. There it encountered eerily familiar sights of dead planets, where once flourishing vibrant cities should be, were now great rips in the planet's surface, the marks of destruction, precise and methodical, like a surgeon's scalpel. Soon after, the Enterprise encountered a ship, like nothing they had seen before, a vast, monolithic 3-kilometer cube. It was then that a passenger on board identified it as a Borg ship. For their part, the Borg were curious. Species 5618 was known to them, but had previously been categorized as too primitive to be of any utility. Yet their presence, so far from their native territory, indicated otherwise, and so the collective resolved to learn why. Sending a drone aboard to survey the Enterprise's propulsion systems before taking a sample of her hull. This yielded no explanation. the collective concluded that the best way to proceed would be by assimilating the entire ship and crew. The Enterprise only escaped because of alien intervention, and as a result, they escaped with the foreknowledge of the terrors that awaited them in the void. Yet, this knowledge came at a great price, for just as humanity was now aware of the Borg, so were the Borg aware of humanity, and the collective's curiosity had been roused. They would be coming. Starfleet quickly realized the unprecedented threat posed by the Borg and sought to prepare for the potential Borg invasion. This would be spearheaded by Commander Shelby of Starfleet Tactical. The work proceeded fast, but not fast enough, as on May 31st, 2366, Starfleet lost contact with the New Providence colony. Subsequent investigation confirmed Starfleet's worst fears. The Borg had arrived, somehow travelling 7,000 light-years in less than a year. Or, at least, that is one explanation, and perhaps a less disturbing prospect than the alternative. That the Borg were already present in Federation space, and had been so for some time, watching them, unseen from the shadows. Whatever the case, the Borg had made themselves known at the New Providence attack. In response, Admiral J.P. Hansen sends Commander Shelby to aid the Enterprise, which will likely be the first ship to encounter the Borg. In the meantime, Hansen sets about assembling a task force to confront the Borg. On the 3rd of June, 2366, the Enterprise investigates the last known coordinates of the transport Lala, now missing. At 010 hours, the Enterprise sends a transmission confirming that they have engaged the Borg. Whether this was the same vessel they had encountered in the Delta Quadrant remains unknown, although the two craft appear to be identical. Borg cubes appear to be the most common vessel, all approximately 3 kilometers in width, height and length, giving it an internal volume of more than 28 kilometers, an area greater than the city of Westminster. Populated by hundreds of thousands of drones, it is equipped with a seemingly endless arsenal of cutting beams, tractor beams, magnomagnetic charges, plasma charges, tachyon charges, and a further wealth of weapons not yet identified. More impressive than its firepower is the resilience of such a vessel. Its decentralized design allows the cube to remain operational even if 78% was rendered inoperable. To do such damage would require a firepower not possessed by any Federation ship, which struggled to defeat the Borg's primary defense, a subspace and magnetic field which could be adapted to repel any known weapon system. Additionally, any damage sustained by the cube could be repaired at an incredible rate, using the collective effort of drones and auxiliary robots. The hull structure itself was critical to this impressive regeneration ability. Most starships are covered by a layer of hull plating, often several inches thick. However, the Borg make use of a composite hull with multiple laminated lattices stacked on top of one another, each perhaps no more than 20 millimeters thick. While not as resilient as a homogeneous hull plating, it is overall more durable. If a portion of hull plating is damaged, the whole section of plating is compromised, whereas the laminated lattices of the Borg cube are comparable to a sheet of paper, individually very fragile, but when stacked on top of one another it becomes a formidable defense, and due to its composite nature, the damage can be easily repaired using any raw materials harvested by the cube. How Borg cubes occur remains unknown. While some speculate they are constructed like any other vessel, it is more probable that cubes in fact grow from assimilated vessels, which over time, as more technology and raw materials are harvested, the ship grows and is restructured to the point that it resembles a cube, after which they continue to grow as it continues to assimilate life forms and technology. With the closest help 6 days away, it fell to the Enterprise to hold off the Borg alone. While somewhat successful, keeping the cube occupied for several hours, they were eventually overpowered and Captain Jean-Luc Picard was captured. The cube then set a direct course for Earth, intent on assimilating the planet, leaving the Enterprise in the dust, unable to rendezvous with the fleet. Nonetheless, the actions of the Enterprise bought Hansen valuable time, allowing him to amass an armada of 40 ships. A fleet of this scale had not been seen since the 4 Years' War. On Sunday, June 5th, 2366, at 1919 hours, Hansen and his fleet of 40 ships engaged the Borg at Wolf-359. Hansen was confident that his larger fleet would be able to overpower the Borg, given its unprecedented scale. Indeed, perhaps the fleet was too big. Starfleet had little experience of commanding and coordinating so many ships at once, and as a result, he adopted a rather simple battle plan. A vanguard would intercept the cube and force it out of warp, into one of the 3 battle lines awaiting. Then the other 2 battle lines would then move to box the cube in, bombarding it from multiple sides. Hansen firmly believed that no ship, not even the Borg, could survive such a formidable bombardment. He would be grievously mistaken. Hansen, having been a close friend and mentor to the now assimilated Picard, allowed feeling and sentiment to cloud his judgment, and he refused to even contemplate that Picard would have surrendered any information to the Borg, failing to understand that that knowledge was no longer Picard's to surrender. Upon detecting Hansen's vanguard, the cube, armed with the knowledge of Starfleet tactics and strategies, dropped out of warp, forcing the center vanguard to come to them and taking them further away from their own support. The 4 ships, consisting of a Miranda, Excelsior, Nebula and Ambassador, engaged. The cube locked onto the Miranda, leading the charge, draining its shields and cutting into the hull. The Excelsior rashly moved to free her comrade, only to herself be caught in a tractor beam and cut apart. The Nebula and Ambassador attacked together, breaking the cube's grip on the Miranda, but before they could get away, the Nebula was caught and its engines sheared off. Fortunately for the Ambassador, Hansen arrived with his main line of 9 ships, with 37 additional ships making a pincer movement around the cube. Hansen opened fire with a volley of 27 torpedoes, to no avail. The cube then set about methodically dismantling the line, concentrating fire on a Challenger and Niagara, forcing them to retire. The cube then fired plasma charges, disabling them, before cutting the now crippled craft to pieces, creating a barrier of debris behind Hansen, cutting off his escape, before then locking on to the flank guard Miranda and New Orleans, before even as the 2 flanking fleets closed in. A Challenger adjacent to the New Orleans, along with a ship from the other flank, opened fire on the cutting beam emitter, although not before it disabled the New Orleans engines, leaving it dead in the water. The cube improvised and immobilized the Challenger in a tractor beam, before maneuvering the now powerless New Orleans onto a collision course with the hapless Challenger, destroying both ships. Simultaneously, the cube engaged the 2 flank groups, attacking the flagships. When their comrades moved to rescue them, they would lock on to the stragglers, before cutting them to pieces. With the cube seemingly unfazed by their assault and threatening to blow through the remainder of his line, Hansen ordered the fleet to fall back and regroup, whilst the 8 remaining ships of the vanguard tried to keep it occupied. Unfortunately, the Borg had decrypted Starfleet communication protocols, and so knew everything Hansen was going to do before he did it. As the ships of the vanguard engaged the cube, they were greeted by a hail of plasma charges. The 2 leading ships were immediately obliterated, the cube then using its tractor beams to hurl the corpse ships at their own comrades, destroying an Ambassador and a Freedom. Still the vanguard fought on, with the more agile Mirandas and Cheyenne able to evade the tractor beam for a short time. Still, they were unable to help their comrades, a Nebula and a Springfield, their phasers now having little effect, as the Borg methodically dissected the Nebula and Springfield, taking special care to extract the tactical pod from the Nebula and the deflector unit of the Springfield. Realizing there was nothing more they could do, the Cheyenne and Miranda attempted to withdraw, only for their engines to be cut from their pylons, leaving them powerless as the cube used its vast mass to simply smash through the wreckage and the two immobilized ships, closing in again on Hansen, who with his remaining ships had formed into a series of diagonally stacked lines to oppose the cube, creating a layered blockade whilst allowing all ships to focus fire on the cube. Unfortunately, this came to little effect, the cube having adapted to nearly all weapon modulations. The cube then locked on to Hansen's flagship, as well as 4 other ships, maneuvering them to block their comrades' escape. It then threw the torpedo module amongst the rear rank of the formation. Initially, they believed the Borg had intended to use it as a battering ram, and had simply missed. To the contrary, it was right where the Borg needed it. They then used their laser beam to detonate the entire magazine, causing over 200 torpedoes to chain detonate in a colossal blast which obliterated 3 ships, creating another wall of twisted metal, trapping the fleet, before then hurling the Springfield's deflector module into the front rank, detonating it and destroying 2 more ships and trapping the fleet amongst the corpses of their own comrades. The cube then destroyed Hansen's flagship, the Ushuaia, leaving the Federation fleet trapped and leaderless. At this point, the captain of an Excelsior, having exhausted his weapons, made a final desperate attempt to stop the Borg, ramming his ship headlong into the cube in the hopes of destroying it. These hopes were dashed, as the Borg magnetic field stopped it dead in its tracks, and at the same time disabled the inertial dampers and structural integrity field. This, combined with the rapid deceleration, caused the entire ship to crumple into itself, crushing the vessel and the crew into a grisly metal hulk. A Niagara class attempted to take command and rally the fleet. The Borg locked on and cut out its bridge, and captured her officers, along with the officers of several other ships that they had destroyed in the battle. These individuals were partially assimilated but retained their natural voice patterns. They were then used to broadcast false orders to the ships, sowing confusion amongst the ranks, as their supposedly dead comrades were seemingly still alive and continuing to fight, or perhaps speaking to them from beyond the grave. This led to 4 ships engaging unsupported, and they were soon caught in tractor beams before being dismembered, shredded down to metal shards. While the cube could have easily detonated the warp cores of each, the Borg opted for a more insidious tactic, which they would use to great effect. Whilst one of their comrades had abandoned them, the remaining ships attempted to form line and concentrated fire using new weapons frequencies, making them somewhat effective, not realizing what the Borg had planned. In response to this barrage, the Borg retaliated with tachyon charges, doing little direct damage but slowly weakening the enemy shields. The cube then detonated a magnomagnetic charge at the port side of the line. This did little direct damage. However, after detonating several more, their terrible purpose became clear. The powerful gravimetric force generated by these charges drew all of the metal debris in the vicinity towards the detonation point. Successive detonations caused this shrapnel and debris to accelerate, hurtling at high speed towards the line. With their shields weakened, the outermost ship was torn to pieces before they even realized what was happening, their perforated wreckage now adding to the razor-sharp cloud of metal as the rest of the line took heavy damage. Once it passed through, the Borg detonated charges on the starboard side, cutting through the formation once again, destroying more ships. The 5 ships, still standing, broke formation and attempted to attack the cube on all sides, refusing to give in despite their severely weakened state, which the cube took advantage of, immobilizing an Excelsior before cutting the engines of a Springfield, trapping it on a collision course with the Excelsior, destroying both in the horrific collision. At the same time, the cube drained the shields of another before using plasma charges to ignite its hull, then throwing it at its comrade, incinerating both ships. The last standing Nebula attempted to turn and flee, only to be caught, the cube then cutting it in half and carving up the 2 hulls, harvesting what was left of the crew and the ship to replace and repair the little damage that it had taken. Of 40 ships, 39 had been destroyed, with close to all hands lost. The sole survivor was the Oberth-class USS Turing, a science ship hastily dragooned into the fleet as a support and communications vessel. Due to this, she never fired a shot in anger, and so avoided the wrath of the cube. After the Borg resumed their course towards Earth, she returned and was able to recover the few survivors and, critically, the black boxes of several ships, which enabled Starfleet to reconstruct the events of the battle and learn from them. As for the cube itself, it would reach Earth, though not before Locutus of Borg was abducted by the Enterprise in a seemingly futile maneuver. This would be the Borg's undoing. Just as Starfleet had been the victim of their own hubris, naively believing that they were prepared for the unknown, so did the Borg fall victim to their own. And so it was that the Borg were undone. After all of Starfleet's weapons and technology had failed them, they were instead brought down by the humble resilience of the human spirit, which even after the most unspeakable tortures and traumas fought on, and in time a single humble voice was able to resist the monolithic chant of millions. While Earth was saved, there was no mention of victory. In the aftermath, Starfleet and an entire generation of officers had lost their innocence. No longer would they look to the distant stars with eager curiosity. Many illustrious and distinguished vessels were destroyed that fateful day. In the Ambassador class, the USS Yamaguchi, USS Victoria, and USS Constantine. Of the Challenger class, the USS Buran, USS Gage, USS Mayweather, and USS Owens. In the Cheyenne class, the USS Awani, USS Apache, and USS Ojibwe. Of the Excelsior class, the USS Melbourne, USS Roosevelt, USS Pretoria, USS Paphos, USS Ushuaia, and USS Istanbul. In the Freedom class, USS Firebrand, USS Liberator, and USS Dauntless. In the Miranda class, the Saratoga, the Shikar, the T'Pol, the Solara, the Janaran, and the Opal Sea. In the Nebula class, the USS Bellerophon, the Rosette, and the Tarantula. In the New Orleans class, the Kyushu, the Drake, and the Shran. In the Niagara class, the USS Princeton and USS Oxford. Of the Springfield class, USS Chekhov, the Tolstoy, the Wordsworth, the Grimm, Austin, and Montefiore. Most were lost with all hands, in a battle that barely lasted 10 minutes and cost 11,000 lives in what had amounted to a futile resistance. This would be a permanent scar on Starfleet's psyche for generations to come. Even today, the system of Wolf-359 remains a graveyard of twisted wreckage and frozen corpses, serving as a continual reminder for future generation of the terrors that await them in the unknown.